Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Food Loves Tech. I'm Brian Halweil. I'm the editor-in-chief of the edible magazines in this area. See some old friends in the audience. Thanks, everyone, for coming. It was our obsession with technology moving into the food chain that was the genesis for this event. And this panel on indoor ag and controlled environment ag is an interesting entry point because I think in many ways there's nothing as new and novel to our food culture as the idea of farms without soil, farms without fields, and farms inside. And I wanted to sort of just set the stage for this discussion that indoor agriculture has been happening for a while. Even though it's by the best estimates still less than 1% of our total food supply, I think we are at the point where we have to accept that that's going to grow pretty fast, and it will be 3% and 5% and 10% pretty quickly. And so what I'd like this discussion to focus on is what's it going to take to get there if we assume that this is a necessary part and a necessary complement to field-grown crops. There are a few significant bits of news from Washington and other political centers that we should keep in mind. From Washington, you probably saw that Sam Clovis, who was the Trump administration nominee for scientific advisor to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, after much protest from the public, he withdrew his nomination. And that's a good sign because he was not a scientist and he was going to be the scientific advisor for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And I'm not sure he knew much about indoor ag and tech moving into the food chain. But also significantly, the National Organic Standards Board, after a lot of back and forth, voted to allow hydroponic grown crops to be certified organic. And that's a major sea change for the organic industry and dramatically expands the market and gives a lot of market stability to this very industry that we're talking about, allowing it to call itself certified organic, that crop certified organic, and move into that market. Here in New York, we're also at an interesting epicenter with a lot of political support for indoor ag. The City Council recently put out a big report on urban food policy that included, as part of the strategy, investing heavily in indoor agriculture around the city and in the New York metro area. And as you might know, Brooklyn is home to the U.S. Department of Agriculture's first ever urban outreach specialist. Another sign that farming in cities, farming indoors, is not just a novel idea, it's becoming a significant part of our food supply. And we have no better folks to discuss what this all means than the folks on this panel who are experts at many different scales and many different links in the food chain in the indoor agriculture industry. And I want to introduce everyone. We'll talk a little bit about their companies. I have some questions, and at the end there will be questions, time for questions from the audience. So just going down the line, Joe Swartz is the Vice President of American Hydroponics, based in Massachusetts and California, a provider of infrastructure for indoor and vertical farms in the US and around the world. Next to Joe is Andrew Carter, co-founder of Smallhold, which is an indoor mushroom producer based in Bushwick. Next over is Tobias Peggs, who's CEO and founder of Square Roots, which is an indoor ag incubator and indoor ag campus based in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Next to
Pfizer building.
Sorry,
close to the Navy
right.
Yard.
Sorry, in the Pfizer building. It's in a yard.
It's definitely in the yard. Yeah, it's
right.
Very, very urban. That is for sure.
Next to Tobias is Jason Green, who's the CEO and co-founder of Edenworks, also in Bushwick, indoor producer of fish and produce. Next over we have Allison Kopf, who's the software specialist on this panel. She's the CEO and co-founder of Agrilyst, which is software, management software for indoor agriculture, a winner of TechCrunch Disrupt and several other technology competitions. Next to me is a good friend, Marc Oshima, Chief Marketing Officer for Aerofarms, which actually operates the largest indoor farm in the world in Newark, New Jersey, and at other sells at locations in the New York metro area. I wanted to, thank you.
That was for you, Mark, right? Amazing.
So I want to go down the line, and if you could talk briefly about the scale of your business, where you operate. Joe, can you get us started?
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Joe Swartz, the Vice President of American Hydroponics. We were founded in 1984, so we've been around a little bit of time. We focus on the commercial hydroponic and controlled environment ag space. We currently have approximately 200 commercial farms here in the United States since 2012. We have designed and built commercial growing systems for notable farms such as Gotham Greens, Sky Vegetables, Lufa Farms. Also done growing systems for the Science Barge and the hydroponic system at the Controlled Environment Ag Center at the University of Arizona. We have growers currently in 65 countries around the world. As I said, we have 200 commercial farms here in the United States. In response to the expansion of urban agriculture, we have farms now, commercial scale farms, in 35 major US cities, and that number is growing. I joined AmHydro 3 years ago. I've been a commercial grower for 31 years myself, and we focus on high-level commercial systems, but we also provide high-level project management, grower training support. We launched the AmHydro Advantage consulting program, so we can offer growers consulting services. All of the commercial system personnel are commercial growers, and we offer that consulting and project management to people even that don't have AmHydro systems per se.
And Joe, not to interrupt you, so you mentioned that you have about 2 million acres that you've built out.
We have 2 million square feet right now, so we have growers that worldwide total a little over 2 million square feet, so that's almost 46 acres. Our growers are producing between 16 million and 20 million pounds of fresh food every year for the local communities.
Great, thank you. Andrew, tell us a little bit about Smallhold.
Yeah, of course. So we are Smallhold. We do a few different things. We operate an organic mushroom farm here in New York City. What's fun about being in New York City is that makes us the only certified organic farm in New York City and the only mushroom farm in New York City, no matter what size we are. We're really new. We officially started in January. So we're selling to a bunch of different restaurants and grocery stores throughout the city. We're pioneering something new though. That's really the core business at Smallhold. We do what we call distributed farming. We install growth chambers on site at restaurants and grocery stores. We pre-grow produce and deliver it into the system. It allows them to have produce grown on site, and they don't really have to do anything. We remotely grow everything with our own technology, make sure everything grows right. It's the freshest stuff possible for a really affordable price.
Thank you.
Good pitch. I want to buy it.
So let's do it.
Tobias, go ahead.
Yes, Square Roots. Yeah, so Square Roots is really all about strengthening communities through food that you can trust. Our position really is that if you know your farmer, you trust your food. So how we grow is we have a series of what are called modular container farms in the Pfizer building, as Brian says. We have 10 of these farms that are built inside refurbished shipping containers. And each one of these farms is capable of producing about 50 or 60 pounds a week of leafy greens, depending on the crop that is grown. We opened that farm exactly 365 days ago. I was watching the memories coming in on Facebook this morning. It's kind of wild, actually. Did you help us put that together on the first day? Yeah, unbelievable. Anyway, the magic in the system is really the farmers. You know, the farmers, they grow food, they sell food, they build up a direct relationship with the customer, but in the background, they're being coached on how to become food entrepreneurs in their own right. And actually the first class, the first cohort of resident food entrepreneurs, as we call them, graduated this week, and 2 of them are now immediately in the process of setting up their own urban farm. So we grow food and we sell food, but we also hope to unleash the next generation of food leaders into the industry, and I hope many of them are on this panel next year.
Thank you.
I'm Jason Green. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Edenworks. And as Brian said, Edenworks grows both fish and produce. We use a technology called aquaponics. So we actually grow fish through an approach called recirculating aquaculture. So we grow fish in tanks, we break down the waste from our fish using natural, kind of like composting bacteria, to produce a fertilizer, like an organic fertilizer, that we then feed to all of our edible plants. The plants absorb all of that nutrition from the system. We're growing the complete plant microbiome, what's often referred to as the soil food web. And then we sell, right now, our produce at grocery stores in Brooklyn. You can find us at the Whole Foods store in Williamsburg. And our next farm will actually start selling the fish as well, which we think is a really exciting opportunity. Indoor agriculture, urban agriculture in general, has done an extraordinary job of producing really fresh, nutritious, traceable produce. Protein has remained a really big problem. The U.S. imports about 90% of its seafood. 40% of that is mislabeled, and for every pound of wild-caught fish, on average, there are 5 pounds of bycatch in addition to destruction of the ecosystems through things like bottom trawling. And so for us, it's a really exciting opportunity to create a symbiotic ecosystem that can provide both produce and protein.
And Edenworks is a great example, too, of the notion of moving beyond leafy greens, which is a majority production from indoor agriculture. And I'm curious when we are going to start to see more and more other crops and what the barriers are to that. Allison, tell us about Agrilyst.
Yeah, so as Brian mentioned, we're the software people on the panel, so don't build farms, but instead sell software. What we do is we help indoor farmers, we make it really easy for them to look at all of the data points related to the crops from seed to harvest, collect all that data, and then we analyze it and provide it back to growers in order to help them improve and manage their operations better. So when we talk to our customers, the #1 challenge generally has to do with finance, whether it's getting capital to expand or getting capital to, working capital to finance different things on the farm, but also just financial sustainability. How do I maintain a profit margin? How do I increase that profit margin? How do I make this a real business for myself? And so what we do is we help them get to that point of profitability and go beyond that and really have a sustainable business for themselves, not just energy and environmental wise, but also financially for them. And what we do really on a functional level is we're trying to focus on automating all the processes on a farm that aren't mechanical. So not something like a seeding machine can automate the seeding process, but it can automate the production management process. So trying to take those things that are pretty labor intensive, but don't necessarily have to be, and give the farmer back those hours.
And can you tell us how many farms or what sort of scale of penetration you have?
Yeah, we started the company about 2.5 years ago, so still also relatively new. And we've got a few hundred users from 10 different countries now on 6 continents.
Marc, tell us about Aerofarms.
Yeah, happy to. So Aerofarms, we are and have been one of the pioneers for indoor vertical farming. So we grow in warehouses without sun or soil. So this is about how we can really think about growing all year round and having control and really be able to deliver fresh produce all year round. Our roots, we go back to 2004. We started out in the upstate area in the Finger Lakes. Our chief science officer, Dr. Ed Harwood, was a professor at Cornell University, one of the top agriculture schools. So we've always had a very much a science approach. Some of the things that Allison was talking about, this capabilities, has been really what's core to what we think is unique about what we do. So we have an understanding of the biology and the environment, the data science, and how we bring that all together. And so we think about ourselves as much as a capabilities organization, so we're harvesting the data as much as we're harvesting the product. But at the end, it's about the impact we can have and how we deliver a beautiful product to have an impact to nourish communities. Today we're headquartered, our global headquarters are in Newark, New Jersey. And the exciting thing there is that today we're a team of 120 people, and we have farms in development on multiple different continents right now.
What do you feel is the barrier to this industry and your operations scaling more rapidly? I mean, Joe, you've seen a lot as you've built out the infrastructure for these farms for 20, 30 years. What is standing in the way of us getting from 1 million acres of indoor ag to 100 million acres?
Well, there's a couple things, and we've seen this, and we've already seen, I've been in the industry long enough to see a couple repeating trends, and one of which obviously is financing. This is a very, very capital intensive business, both in terms of CapEx, but also operation. It's a very, very high production, but it comes at a cost, and that's a significant barrier for most players in the industry. One of the things that we've seen, I saw this in the early 1980s when I first got involved in the industry, and we're seeing it again, is that we see this tremendous influx of people from outside the industry coming in, which is a great thing. Unfortunately, a lot of what gets lost in the conversation is actual growing skill. This is farming. This is high intensity, high production farming. And the growing skill that's required to do this sustainably and successfully is pretty significant, which is one of the reasons that we launched our grower training program. But those two things, the actual financial investment and then the growing skills that are brought to the table, are two of the biggest things right now that we've seen. And we've seen this, again, repeatedly year after year.
Mark or Jason, would you add to that?
Yeah, a couple of things. The talent is an important one. Today, our land-grant universities have been very much focused on the field. So, again, how do we develop the next generation? So we're actually working closely with universities and with the deans around the curriculum and how do we think about that next generation. And so this is a new way of farming where we're integrating the science, the technology, engineering, and math. And our horticulture meeting today looks very much like a statistics meeting. So we talk about, again, how do we think differently about farming? It's one of those things around the skill set that's really important. Joe mentioned the capital intensity. These are and can be quite expensive. But again, what we've done at Aerofarms, we've designed our own growing systems of proprietary. So we manage the capital expenditure, but more importantly, that operating expenditure. And we understand the interaction between the two. And that's really important lens. But I think one of the biggest things that we need to be really cognizant of is around food safety. So again, making sure that we're aware of what's even required and what's needed to make sure we can ensure a safe food supply. And making sure that, again, all the right standards and practices are put in place.
The last point that Mark brings up is actually perhaps one of the biggest opportunities for indoor agriculture, in that the risk of contamination from enteric pathogens, E. coli, Listeria, Salmonella, is actually much lower in indoor grows because there's better point source control. You don't have to worry about an animal running through the field and leaving a present on your salad. So there are practical advantages for growing indoors from that food safety perspective. Going back to both what Mark and Joe brought up about capital intensity, the fact that these are very capex intensive builds, and at the same time you have this high opex, makes it so that if you want to improve the return on capital for these farms, there's a challenge in that reducing your operating expenses in a high labor cost industry does require an investment in automation. And the challenge is that investing in automation doesn't necessarily improve the return on capital. You spend more upfront and hopefully you get better margins, but that doesn't mean that your overall return profile is actually better. And this has been a challenge in manufacturing for the past 200 years, which is how do you invest in automation that makes sense from a returns perspective, and automation that's not going to depreciate faster than you can get a return on it. That is, like, installing a robotic farmer today would cost tens of millions of dollars, and the technology isn't that great, and so employing people is better. And so one of the big things that we've focused on at Edenworks is figuring out where the opportunities are from an automation perspective. The first is production processing, so automated seeding, harvesting, washing, drying, packaging, labeling, figuring out the right production line for all of that. Even after you automate all of that, about 80% of your remaining labor is material handling. It's actually just moving raw materials and moving the growing plants through the production system. And so that's where we feel that there does need to be a lot of innovation. It's something where we've actually filed a number of patents on related to moving product through the growing system.
So there's a lot we shouldn't forget. I think everyone on the panel would say that there's a food safety advantage to indoor agriculture. I'm not going to push back on that. I'm just seeing if everyone agrees. Not invulnerable to food safety problems, but maybe, as you said, there's other opportunities to catch them. We know there's a lot of good evidence that all the farms that you operate and work with are incredibly resource efficient in terms of water use and other major inputs compared to farms outside. what about, who are going to be the indoor farmers of tomorrow? I mean, Tobias, I know you want to speak up, and you're in the process of training these farmers of tomorrow, and I'm wondering, is it land-based farmers who are ultimately the customers who want to launch additional Aerofarms, who want to invest on their own farm in indoor agriculture?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt we need to inspire the next generation of farmers, right? The average age of a farmer in the United States is 58 years old, right? There is a, outside of, thinking about climate change and, what industrial food is doing to, for pollution, there's a demographic time bomb that's there, right? We're kind of going to run out of farmers pretty soon. And so we need to get more young people into the industry, right? And it's amazing that you're now running training courses to bring these people in. I'm sure that the average 20-year-old listening to Allison coming at it from a big data machine learning perspective is super inspired to get into the industry, right? There's a bunch of very smart, I've seen Andrew and the magic that he has as he's talking to kind of young people and bringing them into the industry. But to Joe's point, it is a skill to learn how to be a farmer. You can't turn up and do a hydroponic workshop for half an hour and then boom, open your farm. It takes a long time, it needs a lot of coaching, it needs a lot of training. But I do hope that programs like Square Roots, and there are others, are now providing that on-ramp for that new generation to come in. Allison, as she said, she's a software person, I'm a technologist as well. In that world, there are programs like Y Combinator and Techstars and all of these accelerator programs where if you've got an idea for a new mobile app, you turn up to an accelerator, they give you $100,000 for showing up, 3 months later, boom, you launch your business, right? It's a very understandable and well-repeated pathway to become an entrepreneur. And that really doesn't exist too much in food and farming today, but I think some of the work that we're doing now is beginning to make that happen, and hopefully that new generation will come in.
Can we talk a little bit about what this rise of indoor agriculture means for other parts of the food chain? It's a novel way of farming, but it's also a novel way of distributing food. So everything that you guys are growing, that you're involved in growing, none of it is being put on trucks and being shipped very far. Part of the concept here is siting the farms close to the people. So tell us about your distributed farming model.
Yeah, of course. So I guess a little primer. I've been doing hydroponic growing for quite some time now. Had the pleasure of working with a lot of people on this panel, but realized really quickly that no matter where you are, what happens is you harvest a plant and then it's literally you're just waiting for it to decompose. And what everyone here is trying to figure out is how to make that shelf life a little more accessible. We're not going to necessarily extend the shelf life, but by giving it to the customer day of or second day, then it just allows them to use that produce a little quicker. This prevents food waste. You give retailers and distributors a little more chance to sell them as well. I think that even still, even if you're in in New Jersey or even in New York City, you're still stuck with a pretty brutal distribution system. Sometimes trucks get stuck, last mile delivery is a nightmare, and so we're trying to figure out a new way of doing it. What we're doing is using the distribution channel to distribute living produce instead of dead produce. We're shaving a couple weeks off our growth cycle, we distribute it to the customer, it just finishes off there, and then they can harvest it and have it fresh. So they're at day 0 of shelf life.
And you can see this, right? Mission Chinese right now, right? They've got one of your mushroom farms there above the bar. It's like incredible. And I eat the food there. I know the mushroom has traveled all of like 20 yards to get to my plate. It's incredible.
I think of it as like the miniaturization of the food chain, right? We've moved in this direction of giant farms and giant distribution centers, and you're installing a micro farm right at the point of consumption.
Essentially, but it's still the end node of a large farm. Like we think that there's efficiencies in large scale farming that we can't deny. There's automation, there's labor efficiency, there's knowledge. All that doesn't necessarily make sense when you're doing it at a really, really small scale. So what we're still doing is installing these small farms, but they're just the end nodes of our large distributed farm.
So other novel marketing or distribution models?
I just want to add to that, and I'll plug something really quickly. Every year we survey about 150 to 200 indoor farmers, and we put all the data out for free, and so you can go to our website and see all the data. The new one's coming out actually next week. But this is one of the things that we were looking at was what is the economies of scale as you go sort of large scale and small scale. And when you look at input costs and things like that, you're talking about dollars, maybe tens of dollars per square foot when you look at a small farm. But then you get bigger and bigger and you get into the cents per square foot. And it depends on what you're looking at, whether it's labor or inputs, but there's no denying that there's economies of scale just off the bat without automation, without technology, just by utilizing the same heating and cooling system and being able to scale up, right? So I think one of the key things from a distribution scale perspective is it's not just small, tiny farms that are in a restaurant or in a supermarket or in a residential building that are going to affect distribution. It's faster transportation models, it's how do you get food delivered faster, how do you focus on, there's opportunities for shipping, and how do you not break the cold chain, how do you, and so I don't know that anything's ever gonna be an end-all be-all solution, and I really hesitate to say that urban farming as a whole is gonna be that. But you'll see what happened like in the tomato industry, where you had field-grown tomatoes were the primary source of tomato crop production, but then they moved into hydroponic growing systems and into indoor farms because it made sense economically. And crops like leafy greens, even though it's getting its attention right now, it's still a small percentage of the market of leafy greens where it's going to start to switch over. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's only urban farming.
I was just going to add something to just build on what Andrew was saying too, that small scale, large scale, I mean, there's a level of complexity that doesn't go away. And, I mean, Joe was also talking about this, I mean, the biology is there, right? The aspect of growing and understanding how to manage that. And so that's where, again, large scale does help in terms of making sure you have people, place, and procedures in place to help, mitigate in those challenges. I was just going to share a couple things that we're doing with Aerofarms in terms of our roots in the community, I think, that are helping change. So we actually open up our doors, we have our own farm stand. So in Newark, where we're located, it's a food desert. So the idea of increasing access to more healthier options is something that we're bringing to the community. So beyond just creating jobs, it's about how we can increase access. We've also had a working farm at an inner city school for over 7 years in Newark as well. So the idea that, again, how to help educate and understand, again, how to make better choices, but there's an incredible connection then with their food, how it's grown, and you start to change that equation in terms of thinking about, again, what's going to be valued from that. So I think there's a couple different ways of having impact on the consumer and having that impact in the community.
Yeah, I mean, I think of all these companies here as being founded in the post-Michael Pollan era, right? They are all founded with the assumption that there's something really broken about our food system, and part of their mission is to fix it and improve it. And if you look at the major food brands of yesterday, from Pepsi to Nestle to McDonald's, of course, none of them were founded with that mission. So there's a real evolution here, even if you have questions about the technology, a real mission evolution.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, like I've been in the audience watching panels with Jason and Mark go at each other, hammer and tong, with their kind of religious war on different types of technology. But the fact of the matter is, we're all on the same side, right? The common enemy for all of us is the industrial food system, right? That is a system that is shipping in high-calorie, low-nutrient food from thousands of miles away, and it leaves everyone completely disconnected from the food and disconnected from the people that grow the food. And the results in America, especially, are awful. Obesity, diabetes, climate change, all these things can be linked back to that industrial food system. And all of us, whatever system we're using, that's the common enemy. We're trying to bring local, healthy, fresh, real food to people in the neighborhood.
But you also can't have a real conversation about, all of those things without, and access to food and things without talking about cost either. Right, we're at a point where we're so early in indoor farming to some degree, and people, my Gowanus Whole Foods is selling Gotham greens, which I buy because I like Gotham greens, but it's $3.99 for a 5-ounce clamshell. That's absurd, right? We shouldn't be paying $3.99 for lettuce, or maybe we should be, but that's what the industrialized food system has done. It's subsidized so heavily that it can be so cheap and affordable. But that's a challenge for access. You're talking about being in Newark and Camden, and how do you make that food actually on par with the conventionalized food system? I mean, that's a big question as well.
Yeah, so our farm stand, it's $6 a pound versus $14.77 a pound, right? So that's one of the things that, from a value standpoint, it's also, again, one of the categories that typically a lot of spoilage, so less waste, so again, some of the consumer can actually enjoy, so it's a better value proposition. I was just going to say that as a company, Aerofarms, and talking about the mission, our focus, and we're a certified B Corporation, benefit corporation. The idea is beyond even just agriculture and the food system. It's about, again, how we can use business as a force for good, and how we think about a scorecard that transcends industry, and we think, again, how we are as a good actor. We're also part of something called the Ellen MacArthur Foundation Circular Economy 100. So the idea of how do you eliminate waste and have that environmental lens through everything that we do. So these are important things as a company, and we think about how do we change business overall.
And I know that you guys are doing work with the World Food Program, and there are solutions for indoor agriculture in crisis situations and war situations. We are just about 30 minutes. I want to open for questions from the audience, but I have one other question. We have people on the panel producing leafy greens, producing fish, producing mushrooms. When are we going to start seeing other crops, and when are we going to start seeing other crops?
We're seeing that now. Obviously, and again, a lot of this is public perception. It's a lot of notoriety. We have, particularly in small-scale growers, we have focused on diversity, and part of to the marketing channels that we just talked about, well, is distribution through grocery chains the best, farmers markets, CSAs direct. That diversity of markets is critically important. Well, conversely, that diversity of product line is also. Obviously, and there's certain economics to larger scale monocropping, where we have large scale lettuce or large scale tomato producers, yes. But on a small to mid-sized scale, we have growers innovating all the time. I mean, Andrew's a perfect example of that. We have growers right now in the controlled environment space for small to mid-sized growers, ethnic specialties that are specific to that geography are very, very hot. We in New York at Sky Vegetables, when we were designing the system, growing traditional crops, lettuce, basil, etc. The Brazilian population there was not being served with callaloo. And so we have been growing callaloo in Massachusetts for years, and it caught on. And other growers were looking, well, is that the crop to grow? No, it's not. It's what your market is underserved in. So we have a lot of growers, and this is also fruiting crops. We have growers growing fruiting berry crops, not just the traditional tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, floral growers as well. So this is something that we as growers and as people in the industry have to really foster and encourage, is that diversity, rather than you growing lettuce and you growing lettuce and me growing lettuce and all competing head to head. But by enjoying the systems that we use, allow us a tremendous diversity. So that's actually been going on a lot, but we do need to promote it and foster that more.
It also goes back to the skill of farming, but also being aware and appreciating that there's data and stats and all sorts of other engineering combined with this, and it's focusing then on the crop that you want to grow, right? Andrew is the world's best mushroom grower, right? Because he's focused on that. We had farmers, at Square Roots this year who were growing chili peppers and tomatoes and little tiny heirloom Iroku Japanese turnips, right? They were amazing. I look at Rob here at Farm 1, right? He's growing a bunch of super specialty herbs for very high-end chefs all across New York. And again, it really comes down to that farming skill, understanding what else you can bring to the party with the technology, and then focusing on that and getting that product out.
Yeah, I mean, so it's, I think both of you kind of chimed in on this. It's really understanding your market and growing for your market. I think that what we're doing is focusing on crops that have low shelf life, have issues with transportation. Those are great crops to be growing indoors near a city. It would be really interesting to grow wheat near a city, like indoors, but is that necessary? I don't know. We don't really have the same sort of shelf life issues that we do with leafy greens and herbs and mushrooms.
Yeah, people are still saying the calories will come from the countryside.
I mean, I think that's okay though. I think that it's fine to understand that indoor agriculture is more complementary to the industry. Like there's other precision agriculture, precision irrigation, like all this really interesting stuff that happens in the industry. We don't have to have, there's no one size fits all in this issue.
Yeah, I just want to build on one thing you said, Brian. I mean, calorie is not a calorie. So our focus is, again, empty calories is meaningless in terms of, we think about nutrition, so we think about the opportunity to be able to have controlled growing to optimize the plants for that nutritional density. And so those are things that we're focused on and passionate about. And so we have ability to be able to stress the plants in different ways to increase that nutritional density. So again, it's changing that value equation, again, that when you're buying the product, is it going to have that more impact. But it's also, in terms of, it's not a technology limitation. We've been able to grow a wide range of different crops, from vine crops to tubers to even root vegetables, edible flowers. But it's a question of where the market opportunity is today in terms of the right margin opportunities and economics. And so that's where our focus is today. But as a company, anything plant-based, we think we can grow.
And I think what's also being made clear is that a lot of the technology that you are using is spilling out of indoor farms back onto the landscape, which is an interesting complement. I'd love to take a few questions from the audience. Yes?
Hi. Wow, thank you guys so much for sharing these, the companies that you're working on. It's really inspiring and exciting to hear what you're all doing. And I can't help, while listening to it, I can't help but want to sort of put this in the context of this global food challenge that you rightly mentioned earlier, right? And we all know the stats, right? We're zooming towards a population of 9.7 billion people on the earth, which is 2 billion people more than we have today. There are 2 billion people who are undernourished. So we gotta grow food for 4 billion with a B, more people. And meanwhile, we only have one planet, you know, and we're trying to limit the amount of land that we use to deforest for agriculture. Climate change is limiting the amount of land that we can even grow crops on. So in that global context, how big of a contributor do you see indoor agriculture being towards solving that massive food gap that we're facing?
Good question.
And this is why we love being here, with having great, smart questions that really set up the whole premise. I mean, our focus as a company is how we build these responsible farms in major cities all over the world. Today, one of the initiatives that we're part of, Rockefeller Foundation 100 Resilience Program, we're one of the strategic partners there, thinking about food systems and how we can help cities bring these to different markets in different regions. We just announced a very significant raise that was really about an international collection of different partners to help us think about the impact we can have in different key markets. So we often talk about the challenges that we're facing here in terms of whether it's weather, whether it's access to water, arable land. It's even more acute in different markets, and so our lens is very much about how we can play in those markets.
I would argue that to add on to Mark's point about thinking about regional markets, most of the world's arable land today exists in Africa. Africa is a market where there's a similar amount of food waste as in the US. It's still about 40%, except the waste happens earlier in the supply chain. In the US, most of that happens in our refrigerators, in markets like Africa, as well as other developing nations, or not just developing regions. Most of the waste happens through transportation. A lack of refrigeration, a lack of simply like flat roads means that when you pack up a truck full of fresh produce, very little of that will actually make it to market in one piece. And so when we think about like what the global food system needs, oftentimes it's not even ag tech per se, but it's basic infrastructure like good roads. On top of that, yields in places like Africa could be enhanced simply by technologies that exist today, which is recommending the right seeds to be used for the region, offering climate data through SMS about when you should be planting, when you should be irrigating, when you should hold off on irrigation because rain is coming. Those sorts of really simple, regionally relevant technologies are very compelling. And then, of course, indoor agriculture, at least I think of as kind of a resiliency solution that as the climate changes, as we want to grow food in markets where the economics would justify the investment in an indoor farm, we use that. But in markets like that just need seeds, water, fertilizer, and instructions about when to put what down, it's a great solution.
I think that's a well put point, that in those particularly food insecure and food short areas, which is that, is that chunk of the 9 billion that is most in need of additional food, this technology is particularly relevant. Yes, sir. Yes.
Hi, a great panel. New York City is considering an urban agriculture plan. I'm just curious what you'd like to see on it. What would that be for business, or what do you think is valuable for the urban agriculture industry in New York City?
Excellent question. Just in case anyone didn't hear, New York City is considering an urban agriculture plan. What would you like to see in that plan?
So this is thank you, Henry. A bunch of us.
Do you want to tease it?
Yeah. So background.
I assume the plan is being written as we speak.
Yeah. So Henry is very much.
What's in the plan, Henry?
Yeah. So Henry's kind of a hero. If you don't know Henry Gordon-Smith, Henry's a bit of a hero in the indoor growing space, urban agriculture space, and has been doing much of the legwork behind the scenes in pushing a city council initiative. It was brought to the city council by Raphael Espinal, and it was at the request of the Brooklyn Borough President, Eric Adams. And so there has been a lot of, there's been support to basically understand what's happening in the New York City indoor agriculture and urban agriculture ecosystem. Right now, there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to building codes. There's uncertainty when it comes to how you can market your produce if you are growing it in the city. There are incentive programs that exist for manufacturing and industrial businesses, but oftentimes those incentives are targeted at real estate applications rather than at, but don't support operators. And so there's a lot of interest in understanding how the existing ecosystem works from an economics perspective and a regulatory perspective, and seeing where the opportunities are to bolster this industry, and to share the point that I shared at the City Council about why this is really important. Manufacturing jobs in the US have higher wages and higher growth than the rest of the economy at large. In the US, the manufacturing jobs are growing about 4 times faster than the economy at large. And in New York, we're actually seeing a shrinkage of manufacturing jobs, except in food manufacturing. Indoor agriculture is very much like this marriage of agriculture and manufacturing. And so it's a great way to play out these real economic incentives in terms of both job growth and wage growth at the same time, something that is so compelling from a hedonistic perspective as well.
One more thing that I wanted to say is the plan is being written, so therefore there is no plan today, and yet you've got several companies here that have all sprung up, and we're now contributing to the world of bringing locally grown indoor food to everyone. And if you're entrepreneurial and you see an opportunity in the market and you're passionate about this place, then as all of us show, you can get on and do it today, right? And so I would say the plan that comes, if it can just figure out a way to inspire more entrepreneurs to get on that on-ramp and start contributing, the more of us working on this real food revolution, the better. So make that on-ramp easier would be my #1 request.
Yes.
Thanks, first of all. We've seen a lot of big capital raises from investors like SoftBank, also you guys raised from Kia a little. I was just wondering what could improve the current investors' landscape for indoor farming?
A big exit.
The question was, there's been a lot of very significant fundraising in this industry, investments in the hundreds of millions of dollars from large private equity firms and banks around the world. What can improve the investing environment?
Yeah, I'll say success stories, so whether it's an exit or whether it's just viable businesses, expansion, and be able to have an impact in the market. So those are opportunities that help give more confidence in terms of, again, other areas to invest. And so I think that's part of that lens.
I think it's also interesting, Marc has talked a lot about the social impact, right? And the impact to the community that Aerofarms have, and I think all of us kind of share that as well. And when your company can be positioned as a double bottom line business where you're looking at financial returns as well as social returns, that also opens up other very, very interesting sources of capital, or patient capital, often from foundations that are able to invest in these types of for-profit companies, but ones that explicitly deliver social impact as well. So I think all of us as an industry are beginning to figure out how to tap different sources of financing as well, and the more investors that are coming in, hopefully therefore the more success stories that they will fuel, and then the system will begin to spin on its own.
I mean, it's not a perfect universal solution, but many of the farmers in your cohort got loans from the US Department of Agriculture to rent, to lease their modular farms. So they're not having to get big investments from banks.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you know, we have a number of these kind of impact investors and foundations on our cap table as well. So yeah, I think we're probably all experimenting with different sources of capital to bring into the industry.
There's also a huge difference between venture capital and other sources of capital, right? You know, our company is a software tech company, so in many regards it makes sense for VCs to be excited about and interested in it because they're used to that model, they're used to data platforms, they're used to SaaS, they're used to these types of business models. For a farm, it's very different. You're looking at a very capital intensive, long payback period generally, and so VC typically doesn't make sense for a farm. It makes sense sometimes when you're scaling multiple farms or you're scaling a huge network of data, whatever it may be, but VC is probably not the answer if you're building a farm. We see a lot of our customers struggle because they come to us and say, oh, you know, I'm just struggling so much right now, I can't get capital. I say, what kind of capital are you looking for? I'm looking for venture capital. Yeah. Why? why would you give up equity for something that is long-term? It makes sense for project finance. Every other industry, energy has followed this same business model for so long. And so from how do we attract capital? I think there's a few different things. VCs need to be educated, and there needs to be a big win. We've only had really one huge win for the industry so far, but that's picking up a lot more. We've seen a few $100 million exits. For private investors that aren't VC necessarily, and for loans, they have to understand what a P&L looks like for an indoor farm. That's still pretty held tight right now by farms, but there needs to be more data about what do the actual yields look like, what do the actual capital expenditures look like, what do the actual profitability, profit margins look like, and what does that look like over 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 year period, because that's not well known yet, and so loans aren't going to be given out that easily. And you think about startup opportunities for farms. Most loans require you to have 3 years operational experience before you get a loan. Even the USDA most times requires a background. So it's not that easy to get a loan either, which is why I think a lot of people try and go the VC route.
A couple of points just to kind of build, because we're talking about USDA, and we're talking about the loans, and even Jason was talking about stuff that's geared towards the real estate owner. So incentives specifically for farming haven't been there. So even the USDA program, you have to have a personal guarantee. So there's a different level. There's different government programs in other industries.
There are a number of different loans. It's your question, but just to clarify, there are a number of different loans. So as a startup farmer, you can apply for a $50,000 microloan. If you have a farming mentor with you, right? And that's kind of as much.
For the bigger, like the 100,000 working capital loans.
Exactly.
So that's still within, but in terms of just immediate access, right? So how do you help, facilitate or foster that? I will say that again. So you mentioned, people who join us in terms of both VC as well as, players like an IKEA. We also work with Goldman Sachs and Prudential. This is on project financing. This is on debt financing, where they've looked at our operating history. They've looked at, what are the opportunities, and they've seen, again, what is that, return profile. So it's a different level, much harder to get, much more difficult. So when we talk about, how do you expand in a capital efficient way, having that operating history is one of the ways to demonstrate that.
And there is also a panel on investment happening, I think, later today or tomorrow on investment in the food industry.
There's not.
There's not.
We'll be back at 5. We'll do it again.
There are a number of investors who will be on panels,
Yes.
so they'll have opinions. I think we have to wrap up.
No, we're actually waiting on a couple more panelists for next to it, so if anyone has questions.
Okay, so we'll take another question. Yes, go ahead.
I have a question that's kind of already briefly come up, but it's an important one, and I'm curious what else you guys have to say about it, which is how do we simultaneously address food insecurity and the industrial food system? I went to another panel discussion yesterday on food insecurity, and I was thinking about how a lot of the solutions that were being discussed would really just increase the imports of bananas, and I was thinking that while I was sitting there eating a banana that was provided by the event. And how can we do both at the same time? Because, like you were saying, the cost is currently absurd when you compare it to everything else out there. Is it possible to kind of tackle both these?
I can give you a few different examples, by the way, of things that we're thinking of. So we were working with a customer who was exploring stevia production indoors. Doesn't make sense. I can say it off the bat, just math economically. It's so cheap right now to produce stevia in China because labor is so cheap that it just doesn't make sense to produce that localized in the United States in an indoor farm. It's too high capital intensive, you're not making enough money off of it. There are certain crops that are just not going to economically make sense today. But a lot of that has to do with the way the system is set up and the way that subsidies work in the United States. The way that we subsidize corn, wheat, soy, commodities crops so heavily doesn't put healthy produce at a fair playing field. So yeah, $3.99 is probably not what we're going to pay in a developing country, but also the United States works pretty differently than most areas politically. And so there's things that from a systemic standpoint have to change, I think, in order to introduce things like indoor farming into a systemic change. What I see happening in the US is what I mentioned a little bit earlier, which is sort of similar to what happened in the tomato industry. And it's not that leafy greens gets to be the thing that everybody's eating all the time solely, and lettuce isn't the thing that, we're not all going to live off basil. But what you have is you have a system that doesn't have efficiencies in it that can be replaced by more efficient systems, and then you free up land or you free up resources to do the things that make sense on that plot of land. And so you can put those resources back towards things like wheat or soy or corn or whatever needs to happen, animal feed. And so well, one of the other customers that we have is doing insect production for animal feed indoors. High protein, they can do it really efficiently, they can provide it for animal feed. If you could scale that up, now you've taken even more production land away from that and you free up more resources. And so when you think about a system as a whole, you can think about the things that are least efficient, pull them out and put something more efficient in, but then free up those resources to do something else. Now that doesn't necessarily hold true in the developing country. I think what we're talking about is this is all too high tech and too high cost, probably right now. There are a few folks that are focused on localized indoor farming in various ways to do different things for the developing country, but I think what Jason said earlier is there's so many other challenges that have to happen first from a systems perspective, but if you can start to pull those inefficiencies out and replace them with things a little bit more efficient, and that may not be, an Aerofarms facility, but it may be. It may not be, it may not be that today, but 5 years from now, maybe when the infrastructure exists and there's purchasing and all those types of things.
And a big part of the solution is locating the farm near that food insecure community, integrating that community into employment on the farm, distribution, marketing, etc., which isn't happening now.
And I think you may have a panel actually coming up on this about seed production and that in general, but there's a huge opportunity here from the seed manufacturers as well, because we're still using seeds in this industry that are geared for outdoor farming. But you start to change you start to develop and breed for indoor production, you can change the game of the landscape of crops that you're growing as well.
The one thing that I would add is there's a distribution problem. Indoor agriculture, going back to Allison's point about how Gotham Greens is $3.99 for 5 ounces, so is Earthbound Organic, so is Organic Girl. The California and Arizona grown product that dominates the salad wall is the same price point. And so indoor agriculture is doing a really good job of offering products at price parity at the retail level. And so it's not necessarily a farming problem, but then when you look at, for example, we sell in Whole Foods, you go down the block to an independent grocer, and that same product that was $3.99 in Whole Foods will be anywhere from like $4.49 to $5.49 or $5.99 for the same product, because instead of going direct from the grower to the buyer, instead it's going through a distributor who's marking up the product. It's being sold in lower volumes to that grocer, who then has to get a higher margin on it. And so there are market inefficiencies that result in those higher prices as well. And if we're going to talk about food insecurity in America, we have to talk about school meal programs, because 1 in 5 children in the US is food insecure, and about an equal number of children is eating at least 1 meal in school, if not 2 meals in school, and that may be the only thing that they're eating that day. And so there are very real things that happen off of the farm, but that have to do with distribution, logistics, incentive programs, and massive national priorities that could take better advantage of the food that is coming out of the ground or out of the warehouse today.
One more thing organically that we need to do as members of the community, not as industry professionals, but all of us here, is that we need to really work hard within our local communities to support the local food system. And that includes voting with your dollars, if you will. The Farm to School program is a program that's been around for many, many years, and people have been trying local producers to sell to local foods, local schools, and have been met with a ton of resistance and barriers, and it's never really taken off until the last few years, and that was based on tremendous pressure from the public. So we all knew that local farms producing food for local schools was a great idea. Never really got going, and it's still facing a lot of struggles, but it's local community pressure. We also know that between 2 and 4% of the local community that buys local food will buy at a farmer's market. And they will still go to Whole Foods, they will still go to Wegmans or wherever to buy their produce. There needs to be a local push from the ground up. It doesn't come from the top down, to buy local product at farm stands, participate in CSA programs, push their local communities for farm to school programs, go to farmers markets to make that extra effort. It really is an educational effort, and it really is kind of a groundswell, because we've tried it in the industry for 100 years from the top down. It really needs to come from the bottom up.
time for one more question? Yes.
It's kind of based on a collaboration with the World Food Program and other community programs that are giving back for the international scale or technology transfer between, but we're talking here on the disconnect that's happening.
Great question. So I'll let Marc answer it. Can you tell a little bit more about your collaboration with the World Food Program and maybe also Resilient Cities? And also, I'm going to ask one last question after Marc answers. What would you like to see happen when you're back at Food Loves Tech 1 year from now? What do you want to see happen to your business and your industry that you want to be able to report back 1 year from now? So think about that. And Marc, tell us about the World Food Program collaborations.
Yeah, a couple things. First, I think we talk about what's needed, and there was a lot of discussion around infrastructure and some of the challenges we see in the developing world. Policy, though, is one of the other things. So we've had a lot of discussions with USAID, and similar discussion that was happening just a few years ago with USDA. A lot of the programs have been traditionally very much rooted in the rural environment. USAID, all programs are rural. We talk about, again, how do we build these farms in major cities, bypass that road structure, bypass that complex supply chain, but their programs aren't set up like that. So those are the conversations we're having in terms of thinking about how do we change policy to help foster, be able to help incentives to help develop those programs in those kind of key markets. The program that we're doing today with the Rockefeller Foundation, 100 Resilient Cities, is fundamentally about, again, how we can help cities in different markets think about food and access to food and the whole broader food system, not just indoor vertical farming. And so those are things that we're trying to do from a collaboration standpoint, education standpoint, and sharing. What are some of the things to be thinking about in order to be able to have an impact?
Just really quickly, by the way, if you want more information on other groups, there are a number of refugee groups as well that are doing work in this field and focused on how you can build resiliency within refugee groups. And there's, in Sacramento, there's the IRC is actually doing a pilot project right now with a container farm model, not for indoor farming, but actually for higher tech conventional field farming, but coupled with indoor farming technologies. It's pretty interesting.
So Joe, what would you like to be able to report a year from now?
Well, I'm really inspired by the dramatic increase in small-scale local food production, especially in urban settings. What I'd like to see a year from now is I'd like to see that expanding further, but I would like to see more of a collaborative effort among growers on the smaller scale. We see this in traditional agriculture, and we're seeing it now as controlled environment ag expands. We're still seeing that segmentation in the industry. This grower here is growing basil, and they have a good, I'm going to grow over here, and I'm going to grow basil too, and we've got 6 different lettuce growers kind of all scrambling for the same market share. To work together, both in terms of sharing markets, sharing resources, distribution. There still is infrastructure and distribution, no matter how we produce, that's going to be required. So for growers to work together and combine that and to work in a collaborative effort, again, to enhance their bottom line, to provide better and higher quality food to the communities, I think that's something that I really want to see over the next year. Andrew.
That's awesome. That's a good transition. There's a couple things. A quick plug. All of us are part of the New York Agriculture Collective. You can be kind of an honorary member. But we have that collaboration. We're creating that collaboration in the city. We noticed that there was a lot of people kind of shutting their doors and realizing that there's more collaboration than competition, that we can actually sort of work through this together. We want to see pushing the city to have some action, to make it easier for us to grow. We want to see more people entering the industry. We want to see more growers being part of our collective. As far as smallhold is concerned, we really want to see living produce grown right where it's needed most, right in your restaurant, right in your grocery store, even in your distributor. We want it to be the first day of harvest by the time it gets to you.
Tobias.
Yeah, so 12 months time, this panel, what should change? I'd like there to be 6 completely different panelists, right? And if they're all under 25 and they've all come through a program like Square Roots or stuff that you've done, and we've just like inspired a new generation to come in and start working alongside us to bring real food to everyone, the better, right? The more of us working on this real food movement, the better. We just got to bring people in, collaborate with them, coach them, encourage them, not think about it as competition. The market is bloody enormous. So the more of us working on this, the better. That's what I would want to see.
Jason, what would you report a year from now?
Earlier, Joe made the point about this needs to come from the ground up. And so what I would say is we had this really interesting experience where a year ago at Food Loves Tech, we were doing a lot of explaining of what indoor agriculture is, especially what aquaponics is. This year that's changed where like the few minutes I had before this panel to do some sampling, there were these very cool reactions. I'm like, oh, I've read about aquaponics, that's so cool, and then tasting the product and seeing like the joy of this really delicious product. You're welcome to go down and taste. Shameless plug. But with that, so I would love to see a year from now not just like a familiarity or a curiosity, but like a desire to choose these products because of the way they're grown responsibly, locally, because of the freshness. And then on the fish side, we're doing a lot of, I'd say that's maybe like a year behind the produce side, and we're doing a lot of educating about responsible farming of fish and how we can farm fish with no discharge and no antibiotics and no hormones, and like why farmed fish can be a better option and a complementary option and help us take pressure off the oceans. And so I'd like to see a year from now that same curiosity, open-mindedness, desire to try on the fish side as well.
All right, Allison and Marc, briefly.
I'll be short. The thing that's core to my being and to our business is ensuring that farmers can, once they open their doors, make a living and be able to keep farming. And so for us, I'd love to be able to say a year from now that every single farmer that we're working with, of the thousands hopefully at the end, are still running, are still making a living, are thriving, are open, and are enjoying it still.
Great goal.
I just want to build on one thing we talked about before, which is around food safety. And this even goes back to Henry's question around the NYC Urban Ag initiative. It goes back to even much more broadly the Food Safety Modernization Act. Today there's an exemption for a certain size farm. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's right in terms of like having that compromise for the consumer safety. So one of the things that we think is very important is that there is an equal playing field. Unfortunately, the reason why regulation is needed is that there are bad actors, or there's people who might not even know what the implications may be. So we really want to think about food safety and the importance of that. And I think it's important that all farmers need to be able to participate with the SAFE program.
Thank you. I want to thank the panelists. They're going to be around, so pummel them with questions. Many of them are exhibiting on the factory floor, so go visit Food Loves Tech and try their products. Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you.